Hi, I'm Nate.
I'm Noah.
And welcome back to another Chats episode of Talking Lion. This is a special episode because for the first time on Talking Lion, we're going to be talking with somebody who's not in music. We have our friend Russell Goldman on the show. He's a screenwriter and a director, and I've worked with him for years at this point. We met back when I was in Boston in college, and I've been his sound designer and sound editor for, I say at this point, five or so films. We did a musical called Alpacaland, which we talk about. We did a very bizarre comedy series called Darla. Most recently, we worked on a very powerful short film called No Comment. And we're currently working on a film called I Make Good Sound at Parties. We hope this episode shines a light on how the creative process spans all mediums. And as usual, share what we've been watching and listening to. So,
without further ado,
this is Talking Lion.
well, hey.
Hello.
Hey, friends. How are you?
I think this is a very exciting episode because you are the first non-music person on Talking Lion.
Is that
period.
true? That's 100%
really
exciting.
True. Yeah. I've like low-key wanted this since we started Talking Lion, which was to have Talking Lion be the space where any sort of creative can talk about creative stuff. And of course it's you. Like, of course they're going to have like you on. So it only took us a year and a half, you know?
We had to establish the thing first.
Yeah. You know, we had to make the thing first, you know?
I'm so proud of you boys because the amount of people that start podcasts and never get past a few months of it because they realize that, oh, this is actually like a real job and editing all this audio is actually quite difficult. I had a podcast when I was 17. That's the only podcast I've ever hosted.
Well, I think this is making up for the fact that I really wanted to have a vlog when I was in high school, and that I did 2 episodes, and I was like, fuck this.
It's too much.
But I think people underestimate just how addicted Noah and I are to actually doing random bits of work.
Yeah.
So this fits right in the wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Of that.
And you've had a whole TV blog in this quarantine time.
Yeah. I did it to do it. I think the moment we actually started having work again, I kind of stopped because it felt somewhat frivolous, but it was actually inspired by you. I really liked, because you did a lot of Medium sort of reviews of film, but also these really cool wrap-ups. My favorite was like at the end of the year. Last year, you did like how movies were sort of having conversations with each other.
Oh, yeah.
And that was really cool. Like how
thanks.
certain movies represented different sides of a similar theme. So I was like, I love TV, and I'm a fan of Alan Sepinwall, so might as well do that. But then we started doing the Talking Lion chats, and that became a bit more time consuming. So maybe my TV reviewing career started and ended in this.
Well, if anything, the chats are like half TV review anyway.
Oh, I mean, I'll take it.
Yeah. What was the last thing you reviewed before you backed out?
I think it was Run.
Which I heard got not amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because it started really, really great.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
Yeah.
It takes a turn. It takes a turn partway through into different territory. And you're like, this isn't really what I signed up for.
Well, the thing is that I started reviewing Westworld and Run, and both had really solid like starter episodes, but then got bad, and I just didn't really want to like write. And it's not like they got bad; they just sort of got boring. I just didn't want to like write a review about something I found boring.
Yeah. I tend to. I mean, obviously there are shows that I love and follow to the end of their runs. I tend to really enjoy pilots and fall off the train with many shows after the pilot, even if I like the pilot. And I don't know, I think it's just because I really like movies. I like writing movies. I've tried writing television. I haven't the faintest idea of how to write a television show. And I really just grasp onto a world and an idea and the setup of characters. And half the time, like Westworld pilot is actually a good example for me, where like I saw the pilot of that show and I was like, this is great. And then I saw more episodes coming out and I'm like, I think I've got my fill.
Well, I think I've watched like the pilot of You're the Worst, you know, like a good dozen times, because for me that's like a perfect pilot. Like I love when like a pilot just does such a great job of introducing all of the elements of the show in just such a, I don't know, such a prescient kind of way. But also, yeah, well, around the time like Better Call Saul was playing, and I was like, oh yeah, this is what a good TV show looks like.
Yeah.
But I love TV shows. I think a not insignificant part of our relationship is like going to a bar, having a couple drinks, and then me like pitching you a pilot that I'll never write.
and here's the thing. And I work in this world, so normally when people tell me they have an idea for something, I'm like, okay, and I just like nod and listen for a few minutes, and I'm like, oh, that sounds nice. But every idea, Nate, that you told me for a pilot, I'm like, dude, you should write that. Like, actually write that. It's a good idea.
One of these days I'll just hire like a ghostwriter and be like, I did it, guys. I wrote it.
That's really the entertainment industry way to do it.
There's also story by credit. You can still get some credit and hand it off to somebody else.
I think here's the thing. In songwriting, the worst thing that ever happens to me personally is when the chorus just rocks from the jump, because I'm never going to write that song. If the chorus is great and I let it sit outside of the session, I get too intimidated to actually attack it. If I like an idea enough, it becomes like too big for me. Like it just very much becomes like I have to be well fed and have, gotten 8 hours of sleep like 5 nights in a row, and like be emotionally secure and, like not have anything on the docket to do ever at all, because that will distract from the writing. Like I feel like I kind of like hype it up in my head a bit too much,
Yeah. I mean, and I've definitely felt this the last 2 weeks with like my own writing work around my work. It's like you tend to look for every excuse to not do something. Like, oh, my carpet's a little bit dirty, I should vacuum it. And then you just start cleaning the whole house. It's 2 hours later. It's like, now it's time to make some dinner. And
as previously stated, it's not about the work. Like I don't think the three of us have any issue with like doing a shit ton of work. I think it is more to, if an idea is good and I suck.
It's the famous Ira Glass gap.
Oh yeah.
The famous Ira Glass quote that talks about the gap between the stuff you like and the stuff you make, and like how so much of a creative's job is starting to close that gap. I think of it like the uncanny valley in music, especially. Like there's like, I feel like I'm constantly in the uncanny valley of music, in the music I make versus the music I listen to. But with any creative idea, if you care about it enough, there's going to be a gap between what you see or imagine in your head, the perfect platonic form of the idea, versus what you're capable of making with your hands. And a first draft is never going to measure up to this like beautiful, intricate, wonderful thing you have in your head. And like the steps to get from nothing to the thing, it's not just work.
No, like an idea. An idea is perfect.
An idea is perfect.
An idea is perfect.
And execution is never perfect. And there's just something really disillusioning about wading into the waters of execution. And once you pass that threshold of like the idea isn't perfect, or like you aren't as perfect as your idea, then it's like, well, what's the fucking point?
Well, I think I'm somewhat of a realist in the sense that like I know I can execute a podcast. I know I can execute a song. Like to a better degree than if I were to, I don't want to cut my teeth on an idea that I care about, but I also don't want to work on anything that I don't care about.
Yeah.
And that's the catch. That's the catch 22.
I've been literally right before this podcast, I made a cover of a song, and I want to edit a video to it. I filmed a bunch of stuff on my iPhone, and I've been splicing it together in Premiere for the last like couple of weeks. Every couple of like days when I get a burst of inspiration, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna sit down and do this. And man, like I enjoy video editing. I used to do it as a kid, but it's like a whole fucking thing. I'm just like sitting there like, oh man, I stayed on that shot for too long. Like, why is this so hard? But like it's kind of enriching to work in a medium that isn't at all my medium, but it's still like it's frustrating to like wade into the waters of something that isn't your craft.
Well, that's why I love working with you, Russell, is because I get to sort of go into a world that is both very familiar and unfamiliar, and all of this sort of to say that I appreciate your ear in the bar, but also I'm curious, like, what is currently keeping you up at night? What is the idea that is that's haunting you?
Oh, I mean, what's currently keeping me up at night does not have much to do with my own work.
There's so much in the world that is keeping me up at night, but creatively, what's keeping you up at night?
Creatively, I kind of jumping off of what you guys were saying, like it is, I think if you are looking for a way out of doing something very hard, and I think that this is something I've been talking to people about in quarantine, like when you are a few months into it and your brain starts to kind of go to mush, you tend to look for the easier thing to do in a given day. And that can be reading or consuming a lot of media. That could be, like I mentioned earlier, like just cleaning your house or cooking. But if you have an idea for a project and you want to sit down and take that idea and start to structure it into a film and figure out how that will actually map out, as soon as I reach the I don't know point, it's now quite difficult for me to just sit down and fucking finish the thing. And it takes like a day of going oh, that's like getting an idea that makes me go, that could be pretty good. Ideas tend to come very slowly, or they come to me at 3:30 a.m. when all of my everything else that I'm thinking about and worried about disappears for a little bit, because I'm one track minded right before I fall asleep of I just have to finish this one thing. That tends to be, unfortunately, where I get most of my successful moments in writing. But as far as an idea, I had an idea today, and I'm curious what you guys think of it. Have you heard of the industrial musical?
No.
Okay.
Starlight Express?
That's a great joke. I didn't laugh at it out loud, but it was I thought about it. I was that's a really nice joke.
Thanks. I love when people say that's a good joke.
Yes.
That's a clear indicator that it totally rocked.
I gave you comedy points because I had to think about it, and it's no, that is funny.
No,
so
that is funny.
Nate, I met Nate when I worked on a tractor musical. It was my senior thesis at school. It was called Alpacaland, and a tractor musical, which I think the industrial musical takes some origin from, which is why I want to explain it, is Stalin loved the MGM and Fox musicals of the 1930s, and he commissioned propaganda pieces to be made in Russia, in Soviet Russia, that often followed farmers who would sing and dance on farms about how much they loved their work. And by the end of the film, they were recruited for war. And those films are surreal and distorting, whereas you think of musicals as this beautiful, you're invited into a world. And that was the project that I wanted to make as my senior thesis. What if I made a musical that felt like that?
I mean this with love, but I had no idea it was that deep. I thought you wanted to make a movie about singing people who turned into alpacas. And
yes.
I was on board. I was 100% in and down. I'm I don't even know that we didn't even know each other really that well at the time. And I'm this guy's crazy, and I'm so here for it.
I think my favorite part of that experience is how many people saw the final project and were I had no idea about any of the tractor musical background that drove every decision you made for this film, which I think is kind of interesting when someone makes a movie and all of your parameters of understanding are just not conveyed in the final product.
3 years, and I found out now. I was today years old when I found out that Alpacaland, the first film we worked on together of 4 or 5, was based in Stalin film theory world. Thing. I'm shook.
I remember approaching, because it was taught to us in a world cinema class, and I approached that professor a year later who taught me about tractor musicals, and I said I want to try and emulate one of these in a short film musical that takes place in modern day and has its own cult that you get to build a world around. And I think he said some variation of, why the fuck would you want to do that? And, I did not heed that advice. But the industrial musical is I think it was mainly prominent in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when musicals were still really big. And these would be musicals that were commissioned by very big companies and corporations. And there is a documentary about these kinds of musicals called Bathtubs Over Broadway. And it's about I believe it's a former writer for Letterman who basically uncovers all of these archive pieces of footage and these old song clips from songs that were that had people that worked at a company would be in these musicals. And they would all be this closed circuit thing. They weren't for the general public, but it was in almost in a rah American kind of way, I suppose, generate enthusiasm for whatever product they were selling, and why the newest Ford model was really important.
Right.
Or the latest bathtub was shinier and more comfortable than any bathtub.
And these are entire musicals, about a bathtub?
These are 20 to 30 minute musicals. And
holy shit.
I believe Skittles a couple years ago around a Super Bowl ad made a new one of these that was 20, 30 minutes long with Michael C. Hall. And
Wow.
I highly recommend it. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's a really, really, really funny musical. And I think they actually like did a performance of it on a Broadway stage once. And like, because Skittles has money. But I had the idea that
That's their slogan.
Skittles has money. But I had an idea of if you put this in the modern day, and you maybe put this like half a year to a year from now in the modern day, when companies are trying to figure out how to go back to work safely. And already I'm hearing from so many friends who are like, my boss is setting up, like, we're going to start going in like staggered waves back to our office. And I don't see the value of that because like we're all working from home and that's been totally successful from like what we've been told. So I don't see the reason for exposure. And I think those conversations will just start to happen a lot over the next half year, like how you keep your employees safe. And
Right.
I had the idea of a big company that did not have a great relationship with its employees, and its employees are trying to unionize and they're trying to stifle it, like kind of like the same narratives that you see often. And one creative executive there having the idea of, oh, like we should make an industrial musical to convince people to go back to work, kind of mockumentary where you bring in employees back to work very reluctantly to carry out this idea of them putting on a show about how important their work is.
I love that.
Honestly, only you, man.
That needs to happen.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know what triggered it today, but that
was a today idea.
That was a today idea.
Wow.
Because I don't know, AMC has been on my mind the last few days. Obviously, as a movie guy, and wondering like how the hell are they going to make that safe?
Well,
Yeah.
and I remember too, like one of the moments that made me realize, oh, like this is happening, like this quarantine thing is like happening, was reading your article about the last time you went to a movie theater. Like I think that was like hearing the eulogy for everyday life. I think I've even mentioned on the podcast, I like cried like reading it. So I understand that like AMC is like, we want people back in theaters, but also it's like, it's ridiculous and risky. It is impressive. That was your today idea. The best thing I did today, our mutual friend, Margot, she posted that she ordered a pulled pork sandwich and fried pickles because she knows, and I quote, "I know what makes me happy and it's barbecue." And I was like, I want that on a shirt. She's like, you should write a twangy song. And I wrote a twangy song, like that sounds like Tallest Man on Earth. That I'm calling it, I know what makes me happy, and it's barbecue. That was my thing for the day. I know what makes me happy, and it's barbecue. Know what makes me happy, and it's barbecue. So I'll take a pulled pork sandwich and some fried pickles too. I just love my barbecue. I'm bragging about it. That's how.
And Nate already sold that song to Chili's and got a massive payout.
I'm actually I'm rolling in it as we speak. I'm sitting in a money tub.
Yeah, the listener cannot see this. Nate has a full body bathing suit on, and he's ready to swim in a bunch of money.
I'm just like in just a full tub of money. No, it isn't, because Noah was not part of that writing process.
I really missed out on that one.
But I gave him $20 as a thank you for letting me use his guitar.
I'm currently bathing in just one $20
He's
bill.
using it to sort of rub his armpits. Yeah,
He's just kind of using it as a sponge.
Yeah, just using $20 bill as a sponge.
Well, happy Father's Day to you.
Thank you, Dad.
Speaking of the fatherland and because you were talking about Russia, right?
Yeah.
Is Russia the fatherland?
Yeah, no, it's Father's Day. We can call it the fatherland today.
Thanks, Daddy Russia.
Glorious fatherland.
How do you feel about your dad?
How do I feel about my dad? I love my dad.
What would you say is something that you've learned about your dad, like having now being an adult, and also something you've learned from your dad?
My dad is a pretty quiet guy. And when I talk to him on the phone, and this has been, I think, a constant of my life, but I've really only noticed it the last couple of years, is that we'll have phone conversations where like 10 to 15 seconds go by and no one will say anything. And we'll just like think of the next thing to say. And it's a very, I can only speak for myself here, but I think I can speak for him. It's a very comfortable silence. And there's no real link between when I call my dad, Beyond just like sharing, updates about life and work and health and such. We just tend to like sit there for 10 to 15 seconds and just think of the next thing to say. He's a very soft-spoken guy. When he does speak, he's very articulate, but I think he thinks a lot about his words. And that's something I've learned about my dad the last couple of years.
I like that. And what's something you've learned from your dad? Like, what's a lesson that sticks with you?
That's a great question. I think my dad is a pretty cautious person, and I think I take a lot of that caution from him.
I direct the question to you, Noah. What is something you've learned about your father now that you're an adult, and something that you learned from your father?
What is something that I've learned about my father? I think my father is smarter than he lets on. Like he's also very quiet. I think I relate a lot to your sentiment of long, comfortable pauses of silences when we talk to each other, because we're both very similar in that regard. But he like reads so much. Like he just like tears through books. Like he's always reading about like history and foreign policy, and he's just got so much going on in his brain all the time. And I don't think I always realized that. Like he was always a very like stoic and like wise person, but I don't think I realized until recently like just how much he like reads and is absorbing information. I'm like, what do you do with all that information? Like, I mean, clearly he uses it in his work, but I think he also just enjoys knowledge. And I think that's something that I've kind of gotten from him as well. And another thing that I take from him, or not, I wish I took after him more in this regard, but he's incredibly disciplined. Like he's definitely the kind of guy who like gets up in the morning and puts on a suit and tie and goes to the office at 7 a.m. Like he's even in coronavirus times, he's taken my old bedroom and turned it into an office. And every day he gets up, puts on his work clothes, goes into my room and like works at it like he's going into the office, and like his work routine and commute have remained the same despite like society collapsing. And like I've always respected like he's always throughout my entire childhood was always just like, no excuses, just do the work. And that it very much isn't the way that I operate, but it is a voice that's always echoing in my head. I just imagine like his simple like commitment to just doing the task. Like he just has no qualms. He has no brain plaque. Like he just does the damn thing all the time. And like I respect the hell out of that. And I always aspire to be more like that.
Yeah, same.
I think growing up, I realized things about my dad. The first is that like I think he just really like wants to be happy, which is something that I don't necessarily vibe with. Like I think I'd like to laugh with my friends, but I don't think that like happiness in this sort of like box is this thing that I've ever really like put a lot of stock in. But he just wants to be happy on his terms, and I think that he does a really good job of kind of like of setting up his life around that idea. I don't think I understood that growing up. I think I respect that more now, to like that, it's sort of his world, that he spent a lot of time constructing.
Yeah.
I think the things that I've learned from him, the three like major things are like, he believes that a conversation can fix anything, or a conversation can do anything. So communication was always like almost over communicating, which you guys know is my whole bag. Goal setting. My dad loves like just setting goals, and I've always just I've always had my lists. But I think the thing that like has really struck me the most, whenever we would like travel or whenever we would do something, like we would go sailing every once in a while, and sometimes he would just say like, look at where we are and what we're doing.
Oh, that's great.
And like I'd be playing my Game Boy, or I'd be on my phone, or whatever. I'd be a teenager being a teenager. I don't think I appreciated it at the time, but now I feel sometimes like I wish I could have just like grabbed myself by the shoulders in certain moments in my life and been like, enjoy this. Just like watch, like look at where you are and what you're doing. And I'm trying to just sort of, if there's anything I can take from him, it's that.
That's awesome. I had a conversation with, and maybe it was either a friend sharing a tweet or a friend bringing up the idea organically. Both are pretty interchangeable these days. But it was a friend who shared the idea of like, what's a moment from like your youth where you like, when you were like 3 or whatever, and you had the thought like, I'm going to remember this. And then you remembered that moment the rest of your life, which I think is a great question. Like I have moments like that from when I was 5, when I was like, I'm going to remember this. And then I did. And then I have moments from that when I was like, 19.
Well, I have moments in relationships where I'm like, I'm going to miss this later. And then I'm like, like what I miss looking back is that I was thinking that at the time, Like,
yeah, really the self-fulfilling prophecy there.
Yeah, like I miss mourning.
You literally missed it.
Yeah, like I miss missing it, or like more like mourning something that hasn't ended yet, or like whatever.
Nostalgia is a hell of a drug.
Well, I think we're also professional time travelers. And I think that a lot of our value as far as storytellers goes is being able to both live in the past when you're working on something, but also project what you're experiencing into a future narrative. So I think it's a work hazard for sure.
Yeah, I'll bring up about my dad. I always thought that I got a lot of my sense of humor from the TV shows that I watch or podcasts that I listen to. But my dad was really big on bits, like really big on bits, which was a stark contrast to his general demeanor, which, as I mentioned, is like pretty soft-spoken and eloquent. So there was a bit that he would start when I was very young, like 7 or 8, and we would go out to restaurants and I would want dessert. And he would just he would grumble for a while and just kind of look at me and say like, get a cookie when you get home. And then I would be like kind of sad, and then I'd eat a cookie at home. And we just kept doing that to the point where for Father's Day, I sent him from Milk Bar, I sent him a box of cookies, and the note was a cookie for when you get home.
That's adorable.
That's great.
Yeah.
I don't think my dad's that funny, but I think he always wanted to be, and I appreciate that. Like the guy took every shot he could.
Your dad does have the energy of a comedian
without any of the actual.
He's a comedian at an open mic night with like a ton of heart.
Yeah,
like that is your dad. He's throwing jokes out there, and like some of them are pretty good, but like
I feel like he tells jokes as if his life doesn't depend on it. And I feel like anybody else I've met who in social situations throws jokes around has a sort of death wish.
Yeah, it's fun.
I don't have a great segue, but our Patreon supporter Alan C has a question for the chat, which is there a go-to snack or meal that we just absolutely love?
Ooh.
Peanut butter on toast. Bam.
That's pretty good.
All right, I've been doing this like rice, avocado, and then like scooping it up with seaweed. I like that as a snack quite a lot. But also when I'm in New York, I just eat plain bagels by the dozen.
That's a good snack.
Yeah, I love that's my favorite snack, but only in New York.
Salt and vinegar chips are one of my favorites. A controversial choice, but it's something I really enjoy. I used to literally just drink vinegar packets in restaurants. I have like
you used to just like lick salt
like
off
I literally lick salt off my hands sometimes when I'm hungry or bored, and I have been known to drink vinegar for fun. So that's essentially salt and vinegar is just a socially acceptable way for me to indulge in both of those habits.
Were you one of the kids that like ate glue as a kid, like
No,
in kindergarten?
Interestingly enough, no. I never ate weird non-edible things, but I think this is something I've thought a lot about, especially as I've gotten more into cooking. I'm always like sampling every individual ingredient, and I'm always really fascinated with like how each individual part thing. And I think part of it has to do with like my genuine desire to understand components and how they fit into a larger part of a whole. Like there's something
classic producer,
like fundamentally satisfying about like tasting the salt and being like, that's what salt tastes like, and like tasting a spice and being like, that's what that spice tastes like. So if I'm incorporating it into a mix, there's like a baseline like component understanding of the building block like that goes into like creating stuff.
Well, unintentionally tying it into Father's Day, growing up, whenever we'd go to like hibachi restaurants, my dad would always ask them to grill up the shrimp tail. You know, you have your shrimp and you take the tail off. You'd ask them to grill up the shrimp tail and then eat it.
Wouldn't it be uncomfortable eating a shrimp tail? Just like it's sliding down your stomach and
it doesn't sound fun.
No, it was the thing is like if you grilled it up, it was
like crunchy.
It was crunchy,
yeah,
and it kind of tasted like a potato chip.
Yeah, I could see.
And
that.
I was like in my 20s when I did that, and somebody was like, "That's really weird." Is there something that your fathers did your whole life that you were like, that's not weird, and then as an adult, somebody sort of pointed it out?
My dad would walk around with, and Dad, if you're listening, I share all these stories with nothing but love. He would walk around with a radio at night, just like an old radio, almost like a night guard. Like it was half to check if me and my brothers were sleeping. It was like half to like get something from the kitchen, but he would not have headphones. It would just be like, he would just hold it up to his ear like a small boombox. And I just grew up with that, so I never thought it was weird. And then as a teenager, you walk around with headphones and you're like, oh, that was really that was a strange thing that I've only seen my dad do.
It feels like a stealth game with like the weirdest NPC.
Yeah.
Just holding
Holding
the boombox.
I can't think of anything that got passed down to me that I was confronted with, but if we're just going with lightly roasting our fathers,
I like lightly roasting it like a shrimp tail,
Like a
know?
shrimp tail,
Like
yeah.
a soft seasoning, yeah.
But yeah, one of the things that I find just tremendously adorable about my father is that he prints out everything, like things that like he prints out internet articles to read them, and I just like it's so confounding as a person of our generation to see someone of an older generation's dedication to printing. Just very like recipes and maps and things of that sort. Because I guess you had to back in the day, but he still does it. He like hasn't evolved to reading, but there's still like a millennial on the cusp of Gen Z part of my brain that's just like, why?
I have
Like,
trouble
why would
reading
you?
scripts on my phone. Like, do you print out scripts, Russell, when you have to read them?
No, because I tend to read too many of them that like the math just doesn't make sense. Sometimes if it's something that I am writing or working on, like I will print it out just so I can go through it with a pen and I can read it out loud. You do just get a different appreciation, like line by line, of what's actually there. And it's really nice to just be able to notate it. I tend to read things very quickly on my phone, even maybe more quickly than I would on a computer. I don't know why that is.
I feel like, we are sort of we are the sort of bridging generation as far as like what we do analog versus digital. Like I have the notes app, but I still handwrite pretty much all of our mix notes or like production notes, because that's just how I think. Like I can't like if I type it out on my notes pad, I don't feel like I'm conveying my feelings about something properly. I don't know why I can't do it, but I've tried and I can't.
It's different. I think
It's
it's like
different.
it's been neurologically studied. It's
Same,
like
same for lyrics. Like I can only really like handwrite lyrics. Didn't Tarantino like handwrite his scripts?
He used a typewriter for all of his scripts. Which,
Of course he did.
Yeah, right.
That sounds kind of fun. I've thought about that, and then I just thought that I would go back so often that it would not be worth it. Like you have to,
Yeah,
you have
there's
to
a
grow up
ballsiness
doing
to
that.
that.
Like you have to grow up.
Yeah.
Like that's the MO. I've been doing that since I was a kid.
Well, you don't have a roommate right now, right?
No, I live alone.
So you got to watch out for doing things without being called on. Like I feel like if I were to bring a typewriter into the house, it would be there for a day before everybody in my house wrecked me for it.
It's the kind of thing that you really have to commit to. Because here's the thing. I wouldn't roast you for bringing a typewriter to the house. I would roast you if you didn't commit to it. If you brought in the typewriter, used it for a day, and then never used it again, I would never let you live that down.
Which is exactly what I would do. So I'll never get a typewriter.
Exactly.
Hey, don't do anything by half.
Exactly.
That's what we learned, from Mike Ehrmantraut of Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul fame.
I mean,
half measures.
of the quarantine viewings, Nate, you know that I've been finishing Saul. That's still probably the most I've been struck by almost anything I've watched in quarantine. At least the first couple months of quarantine was watching seasons 3 through 5 of Saul.
Oh, so I was gonna ask you, my next question was gonna be, what TV shows are you watching right now?
A seamless segue.
So that was a seamless segue. Yeah, Saul's incredible. I stand by that. Once Better Call Saul finds its stride, it does things that Breaking Bad just in its premise couldn't do.
I totally agree. I think it's just a murkier show by design than Breaking Bad. And I think the fact that we knew what was going to happen to Jimmy whenever this show would end. I think in the first season or two seasons, I got the sense, and I know other people thought that sort of felt like a crutch. Like it was not clear why they were telling the story yet. And I think once Kim became more prominent, and once especially the brother dynamic between Jimmy and Chuck became just really undeniable, and something that was not on Breaking Bad, you do start to get the sense that it's a much sadder show without the necessity of Breaking Bad, which was amazing in its time, and I had not seen something like Breaking Bad do this, of just building that tension and drama over 5 different seasons. Like I feel like Better Call Saul is like incredibly dramatic and intense now, but even like season 4, which is much quieter than 5, like just had this like smarminess under the surface to it that was really captivating to watch.
Also, the fact that you have Gus, who was arguably one of the best characters, if not the best villain, in Breaking Bad, in Better Call Saul, and he's not the best villain is wild. Like the fact that Lalo Salamanca has managed to be such an incredible character.
Yeah.
Like he's kind of like Azula. We just finished Avatar, and
fun.
I think what's really cool is like the first season, they build up Zuko as this villain, and then you kind of realize that like maybe he's not as good a villain as he is a redemption story. And then they introduce Azula, who is smarter than Zuko, more powerful than Zuko, like just so much more. And Lalo Salamanca is easily the most powerful, smart Salamanca. Like he, especially in the most recent season, he's got like the deadliness of Tuco with like the brains of Gus, and it's awesome.
Yeah, Tony Dalton, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh boy,
the most. I agree with you. I think it's the scariest performance in the show.
Yeah,
and like you said, this is a show with Giancarlo Esposito and Jonathan Banks, and you're like,
yeah,
and Dalton is really just making a meal out of this character.
And the friendlier and more charismatic he is, the more terrified I am of him. But I think you were right too, that they found so much in Kim as well. I think what works with this being a prequel is that we don't know what happens to Kim, and we care now. And the fact that a prequel is able to surprise us is really powerful, I think, despite the fact that it's a prequel. What do you have to say about prequels in general?
Prequels are so difficult to be dramatically successful, in my opinion.
I think if you remove the actual movies from the equation, the Star Wars prequels work, if you know what I mean. Like if you just take the Anakin character and some of his like progression from like little boy to Antichrist, I think there's something
with a different actor.
I think there's something really cool about that conceptually, even though the movies are hot garbage and a mess from a writing perspective. There's still a part of me. Maybe it's just nostalgia goggles, but also, like I said, I'm a huge fan of like the Clone Wars era of the Star Wars canon. There's something I really appreciate about what a bunch of people tried to do with the Anakin story.
I'm gonna throw my cards on the table. Wicked.
Oh, that's cute. I didn't even think about Wicked.
Speaking of movies, what movies are you watching in quarantine that you might want to speak on?
I watch a lot of movies. I've been trying to find as many films by like prominent Black filmmakers as possible that I have not yet seen. I'm trying to go through all of Spike Lee's films. I mean, he's made, I think, 20 some movies over the last 30 years or so, 30 plus years.
Did you watch Do the Right Thing?
Yeah, I had seen, because I had only seen a few of them before. And I had seen Do the Right Thing. I saw that when I was in college. And that movie is like, it's hard to imagine a film that has aged better than Do the Right Thing, just as far as...
What's so interesting is that like our film teacher in high school made a strong point in Do the Right Thing to make sure we understood that destroying property was better than destroying lives. Like that the ending, the message was clear. It wasn't an ambiguous ending, despite the fact that our, I think, mostly white class thought it was an ambiguous ending.
Yeah. And I had forgotten that the film, because in my mind I was like, it ends with the riot. And I had forgotten that it cuts to the next day. And that's, I think, the masterstroke of the movie is like, once the riot is over, like you're left with Spike Lee's character and Danny Aiello. It's just like, they just have to have a conversation because Aiello owes him money. And then the cycle just continues, and the next day is even hotter. It's a masterpiece.
It kept playing in my head when people were talking about like the destruction of property during riots that were going on now. When people were saying, well, how could they destroy this and how could they destroy... I'm like, watch this movie. Like, watch Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, and you get it, that like life is very much more important than property. I haven't seen his newest film on Netflix,
which I love. That's just such an impressive movie as far as like you've never seen, or I've never seen a film told from that perspective. The Black GI in Vietnam, and it's supremely emotional. It's the best study of Trump in a movie. He's like he's like one of many ideas going on in the film, but one of the main characters is a Trump supporter, Delroy Lindo's character, and it's a really interesting study of what can happen in someone's life and the trauma that they can go through that would push them to a point where they become so individualistic, where like no one is out to support me, that would help them make the decision to support someone like Trump. And obviously, Spike Lee has made his own opinions about Trump very clear. But I think he does show this understanding of how different people can be and how trauma, especially PTSD from war, can transform and destroy lives. The whole movie is them returning to Vietnam and returning to both find the deceased body of their old friend that they fought with, and searching for this gold that they had left behind that was intended effectively for reparations. So there's so much going on.
It's on our list for sure.
Yeah.
I think we might even watch it this week.
And it's also like, it's really nice when there's like a great new movie out. Obviously, there has not, a lot of stuff has been pushed back. A lot of stuff.
What about Artemis Fowl?
Come on. What about Artemis Fowl?
I had to skim through on Disney Plus to find the scene where like Josh Gad's jaw becomes like the size of a watermelon, and he just like ingests souls or something. I don't know. I remember reading the first Artemis Fowl when I was a kid. And
no, my grandfather, like, because my grandfather was like an LA guy. Like, when I was like 8, he gave me the Artemis Fowl book, and he's like, "This is gonna be the next Harry Potter." Like, they're gonna make a movie, and it's gonna be huge.
Yeah.
And then it didn't happen for 15 years.
Yeah.
Wait, how old am I? It didn't happen for 19 years.
And now it's going to be a ride at Disneyland.
But it would have been like the perfect like 2003 film, right? Like, it would have been like when everyone is going like, oh, how do we do that Harry Potter thing?
Yeah, it makes no sense that it didn't happen. I would love to learn more of the history of why it didn't happen and why it's happening now. I have no idea why it's happening now.
Well, speaking of Disney history, the film we watched this week was
Atlantis. Speaking of Disney history,
I need
Atlantis.
to rewatch Atlantis. It has been far too long.
It's weird.
It is, I think, way too complicated for a children's movie.
Paced horrifically, or at the very least confusingly.
But incredible. It's
honestly worth it.
So good.
Worth a watch.
But I watched it because I read this article about the fact that like Disney was going to devote part of like Adventureland to it, and that it was supposed to like open the door to like more adventure-based narratives, and like Treasure Planet was like going to ride the coattails of its success and all this stuff, and then the movie flopped.
Yeah, both of them flopped. There is a fascinating piece of like the Disney history of like 2000 to 2004, where it's the last batch of traditionally animated films that they make, and they're trying to target boys, and because I think that they think that they are lacking in that. I think the Pixar films are doing a better job of targeting boys. So they make stuff like Treasure Planet and Atlantis, and that they just they lose their mojo. But like those two movies are really fascinating because they're so complicated.
But
and passion projects by the people making
exactly.
Yeah, like they were like the free pass of the creative teams on those movies who were like, we finally get to do the thing. Like the Hunchback team, part of the Hunchback team was like the Treasure Planet people. And they're like, we finally get to do our thing.
What is for each of you, what is your Disney film?
Ooh.
Oh, Hercules.
Really?
Yeah. I've always loved Greek mythology. I think the music's my favorite of any Disney film.
The songs from Hercules are amazing. That's a film I have not rewatched, but I remember it being so pop culture referencey that I'd be very curious how it holds up.
I don't mind the pop culture reference, especially because the pop culture references are just other Disney films.
That is true.
And also, like, I guess Paul Schaefer being himself. Yeah, no, what's yours?
What is mine? I feel like I didn't grow up on Disney the way a lot of people did. I feel like I watched all of them like once in someone's living room, but I didn't really have that like really deep relationship with the movies that a lot of people tended to. The first thing that comes to mind is Mulan as being one of the ones that I had that I remember the most and felt some kind of personal investment in. I feel like that would be my answer.
My favorite soundtrack is Tarzan. I don't like the movie Tarzan, but I really love the soundtrack.
Oh, man, the music slaps in Tarzan.
The best.
Or I guess Lion King. I'm going to say Lion King. That's the one that feels the most connected to me.
What was your Disney film?
Music is Hunchback. Like 1,000% Hunchback. I think there are some parts of the film that are like very 1996 or 7 whenever it came out. Like Jason Alexander as one of the gargoyle voices.
Yeah.
But
I'm losing to a bird.
I'm losing to a bird. But the music, oh my God. That's just some all-time Alan Menken stuff. But as a movie, I'm like Beauty and the Beast is that's the best movie they've ever made. And that's probably the best movie they'll ever make.
I like Beauty and the Beast. I think I just watched a lot of Hercules as a kid.
Yeah, we gravitate towards what's the VHS?
What's familiar to us? Yeah.
There are days where I would just put on Toy Story 1 and The Lion King just back to back. And I would just like rotate between the two.
I wholeheartedly feel that. Somewhat related, and it's not a movie, but I want to also just shout out as like a narrative thing that I'm experiencing this week. Last of Us 2 came out. And I don't know if you're like a gamer person.
I am not, and I have considered buying a console, which I do not have, solely so I could play The Last of Us 1 and 2.
So I'm about halfway through, and it's absolutely incredible. I was a big fan of the first one. I'm a fan of pretty much anything like Naughty Dog makes. But yeah, I think Craig Mazin worked on it, who's on the podcast that you showed me, Script Notes. And I just think they do a really, really good job as far as just expanding these characters that at this point we've had many years to kind of parse their story. I think sequels are, like prequels, a dramatic challenge. And I was reading up about this, and I think that the first game deals a lot with the things we do for love and how far we go for love. Whereas this one, I think, is the opposite side, is how far do you go because of hate. And I think it's interesting to kind of see that this character, who is essentially a kid in the first game, kind of grapple with this sort of emotional journey as an adult. So it's cool. It's a fascinating game, and I will be playing it for the rest of the evening for sure. There's great lessons from the screenplay on Last of Us, and I feel like it's been used as like video games as a storytelling medium. I think Last of Us 2 very much sits in that world, that we will point to this and say, look, at video games can tell great stories. And just like you don't necessarily like touching TV, I feel like if I'm going to write something, I really want to write like a pilot, or like if I ever learned how to like code a game myself, like I would write like a short story for that game. I feel like the storytelling in games are so fascinating to me.
That's a good argument to buy a console and buy the game. I'm considering an impulse purchase like that, either a video game console or a vinyl player. My friend texted me that she just got, and I would be remiss if I got on your podcast as musicians and to not talk about the thing that I've been consuming the most over the last few days, which is Punisher by Phoebe Bridgers.
Oh, it's so good. Punisher by Phoebe Bridgers is incredible. Graceland 2, I had to listen to 3 or 4 times because the first 2 I started crying. I needed to like listen to one that wouldn't just absolutely emotionally wreck me.
Yeah, that is one of the few songs that you could. I mean, it's doubly as profound once you really just pay attention to what she is singing. But just musically, if you tune out and just let that song wash over you, like there's something like pathological about it. Like it's such an undeniable masterpiece.
Especially reading the lyrics along, you're like, how do you do that? Like, how do you, I mean, and mind you, we're not like strangers to folk music, but I feel like the way that she manages to get her lyrics to be so conversational and unique and specific, and yet have it capture this incredibly universal feeling. It's inspiring. I went home and I wrote not a barbecue song. I wrote a real song. Just inspired just by the poetry of her work. But yeah, you've always had I don't want to say like surprisingly good taste in music, so it always feels like pretentious, but I always love when somebody who's not like ear to the ground music person has very ear to the ground taste. You know, like I feel like we all have to like have our ears to the ground as a job.
If anything, I feel like I envy non-music people's ability to interface with the medium.
Yeah.
Like I feel like when you don't have to make it for a living and you're not picking apart the technicalities and having to listen to the new record for the sake of your career, like you engage with the medium more genuinely. And I'm always interested in like people who don't make music for a living, what they listen to, because it gives me such a different perspective to the stuff that I like am into.
Yeah, I'd say like I've been told I have incredibly strange taste in music, just as far as like it's a third musical theater, it's a third classic rock, and it's a third, and it probably growing, more indie rock, contemporary stuff like Phoebe Bridgers.
I'm there if it's like if you throw in 10% pop music and replace rock music with pop punk, like that's my pie chart. So I feel that. The last question, then we got to wrap. What are you looking forward to?
Oh, that's a great question. I try to not think too much about the future. It's really a one day at a time of like, especially over the last few months where there's so many problems in our country that existed well before COVID, but I think COVID has brought up to the surface in a new way. Like it leaves me hopeful in the sense of like it is wonderful to see like so much active support for voices that have long been silenced. But also at the same time, like it leaves me like the last 3 months feel like 5 years in a certain way, and I can't imagine what 3 months from now will feel like. And I as I imagine maybe you guys and like certainly other people have like it's I've been dealing with like my own mental health stuff like throughout this time, and I can fall into like OCD patterns every now and then that get just very intense. And I think that if a week passes where things feel maybe at a more calming rhythm, then I'll take that for what it is. And I won't tend to look too far into like what may come next. I don't want to have too many expectations for the future beyond like I guess the understanding that like there was so much wrong with our world before all of this started, and every day you read about something new that is like completely appalling. It's a 1 week at a time kind of world.
Well, I'm with you 100%. We passed 100 days in this. I have a hard time doing things like a week at a time because so much of my own like personal comfort comes from like forward planning.
Yeah, same.
But I find that like I've been like what my dad suggests, looking where I am and what I'm doing. So like we got cellos for a song that we're working on called We're Fine, and they were great. And I'm looking forward to that song, and I was excited about that song. We're working on this movie together. I make good sounds at parties, and
which is a true period piece now. I'll say a little bit about it. It's a project that I invented out of my own anxiety going to social events, and the idea of going to social events, the idea of like feeling alone at them, tying to being in a relationship for a very long time where like you don't need to go to a party to feel connected to somebody. And then that period in your life where like that ends and then you go back out and you try to feel connection and it all usually just blows back up in your face. And there was so much anxiety and like anti-party mentality in that movie. Then now working on it and we're almost finished with post-production on it. It does feel like such a nostalgic time capsule of like, oh, when you could have all of these people pretending to have a party in a space and everyone felt okay. And like, you did not because of your own reasons. But there is something very quaint about that. And I'm curious how that will strike people if they ever watch it.
If anything, I feel like it might add to the charm of the movie, the context of how quaint it is in the world we're living to think of parties as a concept.
Well, but also the ideas of connection. Like I think the reason why it really hit me and why I was so excited to work on it with you guys was because like I was going through a breakup, and there is something to be said about like going out to try to like recapture not necessarily a romantic feeling, but just capture a feeling of like somebody being on your page. And I feel like we're still experiencing that even if it's not actually at a party. I feel like the movie still strikes a chord. And, in a lot of ways, the reason why it took as long as it did was because of like we would have had our hands clean with it if we were all able to be in the same room together and do this together. But like, I haven't seen you in months, and
yeah, not being in the same room as somebody makes it extremely hard to collaborate, and everyone really just works in their own spaces and they share. And I feel this in my own like professional job, and I feel that like working on parties, where like in both categories, like I love everybody that I work with. I think they're amazing at what they do. But there is it's so much easier to be less excited about making something together just because you don't get the spark of like, when we would do other short films and I would just like sit in your bedroom for like 6 hours at a time.
You're an incredibly talented director, and part of the way that you're talented is the way that you're hands-on. Like I think that because you know all the elements of your film, you don't necessarily accept a deferral to somebody if it doesn't need to be deferred. Like you have a gut feeling about how you want your films to feel, which is really refreshing and also incredibly challenging. I think it's the two sides of the sword of work movie that I love, because I really get the feeling for the first time, in my life, having studied it in high school as well, of like working with an auteur, like somebody who knows every aspect and has a taste for every aspect of their film. And on the other hand, part of me sometimes wishes I could just like throw it out and not like have it under any kind of like scrutiny. But because we worked on this film No Comment together, and For people who haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you check it out. I did the sound, you wrote and directed it, and it's a really powerful film. And I remember seeing that film. There were two things about that film that actually really like struck me. The first was coming onto set and seeing like you and Amanda and Sophie, who I essentially grew up with, doing the job that you always said you would do. And that was really, really powerful to see, but also just seeing the whole thing come together and seeing a fully realized film with a really important message get done right, like get done the way that you needed it to get done. And I think that's something I really miss about working with you is being able to have there be no obstacles between like what you want from a film and what we can do together. Similarly, I know you probably have a million ideas that some of which might have already started coming into existence had this not all gone down. So I just wanted to give that kind of shout out because yeah, it's always been a pleasure working on stuff, but this is definitely a weird time to be working on anything.
Yeah, and it's a strange. I truly appreciate everything that you just said, and like I think that because you have had a role on so many things that I've made since I was in college, it's been really fun to see that arc, and it's been fun to grow with you as a collaborator. And like, here's the thing, I don't really know anything about anything in regards to especially technical things. So I have a history of like, well, I will have an idea of how something will sound in my head, and it sometimes takes a while to articulate how to put that on a timeline in your sound editing software. The other thing I'd say is like, there is a question of like what stories people want to see and want to consume. And like, there will be no doubt that there will be like many movies about COVID in some way, whether it is like the spectacle version of it, or it's like the indie,
metaphor,
or like the indie drama version of it, of just like what life in quarantine is like. And I am so curious how it all comes down to the artist, of course, but like, I'm so curious how those stories will be reflected. But like the thing that has gotten, I think, everyone through this time is watching content and like watching stories that like move you in a certain way that could have nothing to do with the world at large. They could have everything to do with the world at large. I feel very grateful for what I'm working on now, but I'm excited when this is maybe not over, but when COVID reaches a safer place for at least LA to resume working with people like you guys. And because there's no better rush than like being on a set, especially for something as intimate as a short film, and trusting everyone that you work with and going, that idea is great. Like, okay, we have like 5 minutes that we could implement it in. And then months later, you see it in the final film and you go like, I can't imagine what this movie would be like if Amanda hadn't pointed that out, or Sophie hadn't pointed that out, or if Nate hadn't pointed out that sound. I still think about
the publicist.
There's a moment in the short film where like, all I'll say about it is like the logic of the movie would fall apart without a note that Nate gave me in pre-production on that film. And that's what I love. Like, that's just genuinely what I love about spearheading a project or working on somebody else's project is just finding those moments of like, of true excitement. And I feel really grateful that I've gotten to work with awesome people.
Well, I stand by what I said when we got a drink. One of the last times we were able to get a drink, which is I think at some point people are going to talk about your films the way we talk about other filmmakers. And I'm very much looking forward to that time. And I will be editing the footsteps in the backgrounds up until then and through then, But I'd love for you to be on the show more. I think opening this space up for different art forms and different perspectives is really important, because I think there's a lot more to kind of be gleaned from different art forms where there's a lot more kind of variation. Like there's not a ton to talk about when it comes to music, I think.
Yeah. It's been done.
It's been done, And mind you, we have a music podcast, love talking about music, but I do feel like there's just something really cool about parsing stories. And that is not music exclusive. And so much of talking about and talking with artists on the podcast have been the stories behind their songs. I don't think stories are music exclusive. So I'd love to have you on again, and I can't wait for us to work again in the future, or just hang in the future when this is a less strange and scary world. But until then, we have a film to work on, so we're gonna do. We have ideas that are keeping us up at night that we're gonna keep at.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you need music for your
Industrial
industrial
musical.
musical about a corporation trying to get itself back together,
I know a couple lions.
sign me up, because that sounds great.
Oh, damn. I'm still going to take you guys up on that.
It's good to see you even like this, and I'm looking forward to everything you're doing. So thank you for being on.
Thank you guys for having me. This was a true joy.
We would like to thank Alan C. for supporting Talking Lion on Patreon and Isotope.